Hi, I'm Robbie, and for more than 10 years I'm visiting Vietnam frequently. When I'm in Vietnam, students always want to talk to me to practice their English. It always strikes me that their English is much better than mine. They have bigger vocabulary, their grammar, and even their pronunciation is better. Nevertheless, they always want to practice with me because for them I have a more natural sound. As a developer of educational programs, I wanted to know why this is possible. So I went to investigate what is the big difference between Vietnamese and English. Well, it turns out it all has to do with how we learn and transmit language. It is true that we learn in our first years the rudiments and distinguishing the sounds we need for our mother tongue. But real learning starts at school, and we use books for that. What we do not always think about is that every writing system has its specific possibilities and grammar. And those differences are they're not so obvious, except in Vietnam. For a few thousand years, the Vietnamese used a logographic script, and it's less than 100 years since they switched to use the Latin letters. As a result, Vietnamese does have the structure, the grammar and idiosyncrasies of a logographic script, which is visual based, but the use of Latin letters make it look like an alphabetic sound based script. It is thanks to this unique combination that the consequence of those differences become clear when we are aware of them. For all kinds of reasons, this is rarely, if ever, give any attention, while they do cause certain problems. When one does not know the exact cause of a problem, it's also difficult to solve. Therefore, in this video, I address specific issues caused by the difference between the visual-based logographic script and the sound-based alphabetic script. The result is also particularly interesting for people who want to learn an alphabetic language while they use another writing system. The logographic script is a purely visual script. English and other alphabetic languages are sound-based scripts. The difference is most easily seen when looking at how words are written. Writing a word in sound writing goes letter by letter, sound by sound. The order is determined by how the word sounds, and while writing you also hear what you write. The logographic script consists of painting characters, which is made up of strokes, and you have to draw them in a fixed order. On Chinese EasyCom we see a good example of the main strokes. The strokes do not represent a sound. Only when the character is finished, then you can pronounce it. A character is originally an abstracted representation of what the word means. As an example, you can see in this booklet, Fun with Chinese Characters, how the character originated from a child. It's like this. The character stands for child, but how you pronounce it depends on what language you speak. In English you say child, in Vietnamese you say tuổi trẻ, but it remains the same character. For about 2000 years the Vietnamese used the logographic script. Barely 100 years ago they started to use Latin letters to describe the sound that is made when a word is said. The big problem was that there are far too few Latin letters for all the Vietnamese sounds. This has partly been solved by using all possible diacritics. In the Wikipedia we can see they have more than 90 different letters, which make reading Vietnamese very difficult for foreigners, and not only the reading. Those are, for example, the single vowels. Vietnamese has more than 35 different vowel sounds. each of which gives a different meaning to a word, and you can pronounce two sounds with 5 or 6 different tones. Although this is not a big problem for the Vietnamese. For them there is a completely different problem. Because of the new writing system, the written Vietnamese looks very much like an alphabetic sound-based language. But it's not that at all. And it gives specific problems for them to speak English, because that is a real sound language. It starts with the fact that the spoken Vietnamese, with all its diacritics, follow the written language quite closely. In contrast, the spoken English often has little to do with the written language. So one has to pronounce horse different with worse, beard different with hurt. Even exactly the same written words are pronounced different. I got a tear in eye and your dress will tear. So those are just a few examples how difficult it is to know how to pronounce the written English, because there are no markings to help you. Moreover, because every pronunciation is individual. The difference in pronunciation between horse and worse is also individual. That is why it's important to listen to the same speaker a lot, while listening to many different speakers is rather confusing. It's because the pronunciation of horse and worse is not absolute, but the difference in pronunciation of those words is constant for a single speaker. So the essence of a sound language is that words are built from sounds. You can simply add sounds, leave them out or pronounce them differently. That's not possible with the logographic based Vietnamese words. Of course, that will change over the years, but for now a Vietnamese word stands for how the original character is pronounced. And in logographic writing you cannot add or omit some strokes. That's why you just can add or omit some sounds to a Vietnamese word. And Vietnamese are not used to that either. Characters are one short syllable words. While when words made up of sounds, they can have different syllables, and anything can easily be added before, between or after the basic of a word. And there are not always rules for that, although some habits are generally established. For example, we do not say today but today, or for you but for you. I will come back to this in a moment, because again this does not just happen. It has something to do with breathing. We can read a whole series of characters in a row without any problem. Like a comic book. Our eyes flies over it. But for sound writing we need air, even when we read or write it. And those who consume air must breathe. But where, at what point should we breathe? To tell where to breathe, they invented a few thousand years ago the breathing signs. The most famous are the point and the comma. By telling where to breathe, they also determine the structure and thus the grammar of a sentence. In original logographic script, there were no points of commas. The text simply continues on the various bamboo slats from top to bottom and from the right to the left. Of course, when all words are in a row, the text becomes unreadable. So to break it down, special grammatical techniques were used. For example, by giving a time indication to indicate a new sentence. Hence, that is why many Vietnamese sentences still begin with an indication of time. Other breathing signs, such as exclamation and question marks, not only give clues to take a breath, they are also clues to stress or to give extra meaning to the last part of a sentence. The punctuation marks had an important influence for the development of the sound-based grammar. Since logographic writing didn't use those punctuation marks, they had other grammatical solutions to turn a sentence into a question. So you don't actually need a question mark for Vietnamese sentence. That's clear from the sentence structures and the use of certain words. And it has nothing to do with a breathing or the use of tones. A question mark indicates that the last part of a sentence has to rise. Take a sentence like, so you like coconuts. So you like coconuts. It can be a question when you pronounce it like, so you like coconuts? But if you do that in Vietnamese and you pronounce Vì vậy bạn thích quả dứa, that's not the same as Vì vậy bạn thích quả dứa. It doesn't become a question, you only change the fruit from coconut to pineapple. Sorry for my Vietnamese, I still have to learn it. The functional use of breathing and tones in this way is something Vietnamese need to get used to. It's very typical that when they speak English, they actually often breathe coincidental throughout the whole sentence and pronounce all the words more or less evenly. They are also used to saying words separately, not in the same breath, and that makes a huge difference in speech. It is one of the reasons why the pronunciation and the articulation of the Vietnamese is often so much better than that of people who grew up with sound languages. But it also makes them not sound like a local, even though they use typical local expression. Yes, it's good to practice to pronounce every single word clearly. It's a good exercise, especially for Vietnamese, because I often hear them not pronouncing the last letter of a word. However, fluent conversation requires you to say a whole sentence more or less in one breath, and that is something you have to practice. Logographic writing is incredibly efficient. Just about every word is important. Alphabetic languages, on the other hand, have many words that are considered weak. Those are not stressed, sometimes partly omitted, or the original sound is replaced by the schwa. The schwa is an unstressed and toneless neutral vowel. The examples I gave earlier can therefore best be written as today and for you. Weak words are therefore suppressed and strong words are stressed. They get extra air. Air is for free, so we can have many ways of using air and sound. For example, there can be a really big difference in the reaction of your British friend if you enthusiastically suggest an activity to him. So he might react with, that's interesting. This means, well, that's the last thing we should talk about. And yeah, that's interesting, meaning, well, it's not really not important for the moment. Or, that's interesting, meaning, well, you make a great point. We should keep it in mind. To correctly appreciate the pronunciation, the way words are stressed, is important to know a bit about the cultural background of the interlocutor. The British have been quite some time in Asia and they know the concept of losing face. Those are three friendly variations to say that they are not interested in your proposal. So one can stress words also based on the meaning of the word. When you say, for example, going down, and you want to stress that it's very down, your voice also goes down a lot. In Vietnamese you say, đi xuống. You cannot go down. The pronunciation and tones of Vietnamese words rarely have any relation to the meaning. And that's again the result of original script used. As is well known, Westerns are constantly reminded that the Vietnamese is a tonal language. If you pronounce a certain word with different tones, it takes a different vocabulary meaning. And indeed, that's a problem. However, by saying that a language is a tonal language, you suggest that other languages are monotonous, and nothing could be further from the truth. Especially when we talk about English, which use the same and even more tones. But unlike in Vietnamese, it's rarely about a vocabulary meaning, but it's about an emotional meaning. Just to illustrate, take a simple word as yes. It can be pronounced with a dot, yes. And then it means yes, no way. One can pronounce yes in several ways, and every time it means something completely different. Like, yes, it means I'm getting so tired of it, can we talk about something else? Or, yes, really sounds great. Or, yes, which means maybe. In Vietnamese, the tones are clearly indicated and the vocabulary meaning of the word is often also made clear by the other words in the sentence. I will come back to this in detail when we talk about compound words. A big difference with the Vietnamese use of the tones is that English, there is usually no indication whatsoever. Yes is written, but which yes is meant, it's not stated. And the meaning is also personally colored. The actual emotional meaning, therefore, also depends on who is speaking. The same statement of a cheerful person can have the opposite meaning of that of a grumpy speaker. So a sentence can pronounce in all kinds of directions. Take a very simple sentence like, maybe you use a hammer. Pronounced it like this, it's just an advice. But seeing someone using the things that can break instead of a hammer, you will pronounce it like, maybe you can use a hammer. And then it's an order. And when you see somebody doing something stupid while trying to fix his phone, you might say, maybe you use a hammer? And now it's a question. Well, when you see someone with a lot of posters and a box of thumbtacks, you can suggest, maybe you use a hammer. So, sound languages have many syllables and compound words, and with that composition there are also weak and strong parts. Placing the right stress is very important to be well understood. And again, there are rules, but it's still very confusing because you say, for example, I am present, if it is a noun, and I present this when it is a verb, same word. In sound-based languages, compound words can be really very long, like this one. It's an official word, pneumono-ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis. Well, I forgot which part I had to stress, but you get the picture, I guess. The way words are composed in Vietnamese is dictated by the logographic script and is a major cause of the difficulty in pronouncing the English. And because little attention is paid to this during English lesson, while it's very important to know what is so different about Vietnamese and English, I want to illustrate this with a few examples. But first, a reminder. When we see words with Latin letters in the current Vietnamese script, they are not letter by letter, sound by sound constructed as in the case with alphabetic languages. The sound only came after the character was completed. The Vietnamese words we see are an oral representation of a logographic character, and the character is a visual representation of meaning, even though the character means a certain sound. A character can have a simple structure, but it can also be composed of other characters, such as the character for T as we see. This character is actually consists of 3 characters. This character represents that it is a plant. This character indicates that the material had undergone processing. And this character indicates that it belongs to the tree family. And each of those characters, they all have their own logical development. This is, for example, the development of tree. So while painting the character for tea, you are also describing the product. You're describing its plant and its process and its family of tree. That's a completely different activity than putting the letters for T-R-A on paper. The new Vietnamese script no longer makes it clear what the original characters meant. Fortunately, there are associations that ensure that Chu Nom, the original Vietnamese logographic writing, does not appear, because that would mean a huge cultural loss for the Vietnamese. As I said before, the logographic script is incredibly efficient. English has more than 750,000 words, while Chinese has less than 100,000 characters. An important reason is that in English a separate word is needed for everything, while the logographic script solved the problem by combining characters so that they can say almost as much with far fewer characters. To understand the cause of a major pronunciation problem, it's important to realize that, for example, Nan Vien Bang Hang are 4 words, but that they actually represent 4 characters. It is a combination of those 4 words that we render in English as just one word, namely salesman. And now the Vietnamese understand what I said before. What we see now is that salesman is also a combination of words, the man who is selling, or in short, salesman. This contradiction, or this contraction of the different word, is possible in a sound-based written system without any problem, in contradiction with the visual-based system, the writing system. This meant in Vietnamese you have to pronounce the different parts of Nhang Vien Bang Hang carefully, separately and evenly. And this applies to many Vietnamese words, with the result that many Vietnamese also pronounce English that way. As I mentioned before, they have a beautiful pronunciation, the Vietnamese. They also speak much faster than I do. However, in English, the man selling is pulled together into a single word, and within that word the first syllable is stressed, so you say salesman. And we do not stress the rest of the parts, even though man in itself is a strong word. So we do not say salesman, as some Vietnamese will automatically do. So in short, because the logographic based language doesn't have weak or strong words, partly because the word's meaning has a high intensity, and partly because it's visual based and all characters have the same size and the same thing. It is thanks to the use of breadth that we can distinguish between weak and strong words. Oh, it's weak and strong words. As I mentioned earlier, my grammar is really very limited. So I don't use it at all to speak. I study the sentence and the meaning of the words and the importance that the meaning has within the sentence. In a sentence like, I'm going to the factory late, there are 2 words that stand out to me, late and factory. Then I study the development of the story to see which of those words is the most important. That could be the time indication, late, or the place where something is going to happen, the factory. So I do not stress words from the grammatical meaning, but from their meaning in the story. So it can be, I'm going to the factory late, or I'm going to the factory late, or well, I don't know anymore. Well, there's of course much more to tell about how you use sound in a sound language. By stressing certain words, you bring tension in a story. Sometimes you can create a specific rhythm by stressing, which is very nice when it's a story for children, for example. They are sensitive to this, especially if that rhythm matches the sound of the words. So I think that to obtain a good pronunciation, it's important to understand the meaning of a sentence. and what keywords are important to understand the story. And those words have to be stressed or the opposite, which can have the same surprising effect. And of course in Vietnam they also have very written songs and stories for children. It's not, but it's different. The way they put strong and weak words, it's just different with the spoken, the sound-based language. So another useful tool to practice is that we can speak in different pitches, and those are also have their own meaning. We have the normal conversation tone, and if you want to exercise your mouth muscle for this, you can say meow a few times, because to make this sound you need the same mouth muscles as for normal English. Then you have the uptalk. It's high and light, and usually used to say nothing in many words, but it's a very social way of talking. And the opposite is that with the vocal fry or creaky voice. Speaking in a low, dark voice, like James Bond often does. It gives the impression that you know everything and you're a master of the situation, and not only a man can talk like that. In fact, women are better at talking with creaky voice than men. I have not spoken of using facial expressions to support the use of sound, because that's even much more individual. Some people are very good in it and they become actors. When they are on stage, people in the back of the theater already understand what is being said on their added facial expressions. Incidentally, that's an excellent exercise. Stand 10 meters away from each other and say something very softly. You will be surprised how well you can understand each other. It's for the same reason why we can talk with each other with a soft voice while there's a lot of noise around us. We just have to focus on what we want to hear. The best example of recognizing a specific sound we can see on the BBC Earth, where the penguins have to find their partner. They all look alike, but they sound different. So when they come home after months being on the sea to gather food, they call their partner and their partner responds. And it's unbelievable, but they really recognize each other's sounds. So thank you for listening. I'm waiting for your response, and it's very nice when you make all your friends to subscribe. Thank you.